All right, so in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about receipts, disbursements, and cash balances. So basically what I'm looking at is with the receipts, it's how when money's coming into the business, disbursements, money is being paid out of the business, and kind of a little bit about how that relates to cash balances and some thoughts about cash balances. So let's kind of first talk about the idea of float. Float is funds that are sent but not yet usable. So in other words, your customer sent you money, but it's not yet usable. Now, historically, there have been essentially three components of float. We've got mail float, which is if they actually mailed you a check, how long it takes from when they sent it to you to when you've actually received it. Processing float is from when you've received the check to when you actually manage to get the thing deposited. And then clearing float would be from when you've deposited it to when your financial institution basically says, hey, that money is actually usable. So from that standpoint, there was actually a whole length of time associated with this whole process of when your customer sent you money. However, you also had a similar process going on from when you sent your supplier money. So from that standpoint, there would be a delay from when you received money from your customer, but there's also a delay from when you actually paid your supplier and the money actually ultimately left your account. So the idea used to be kind of this whole process of sort of managing, well, sort of what's the delay of receipt, the delay of disbursement, try to manage that in an advantageous manner. Obviously, what this would kind of turn into would be, it would be preferential to collect faster, but then slow down the payment, because then essentially more money would stay in my account for slightly longer. Maybe I get slightly more interest, et cetera. So one possible approach there would be, just try to just flat out collect faster and or slow down the payments. Now, from my perspective, I think in today's business world, obviously a lot of payments are being processed electronically at this point. So when you factor in electronic payments, well, first off, mail float's basically gone if I'm doing an electronic payment. So that's gone. But then also the processing float, well, I don't really have a time from when I'm receiving to when I'm depositing it. I mean, if they're actually doing electronic payment, I mean, the money goes straight into my account. So from that standpoint, I largely don't have that processing float either for the most part. Clearing float, I am possibly still going to have. There might be a delay from when you can kind of see the transaction is pending to when it is actually cleared and is fully usable as a business and so forth. So generally speaking, as more and more payments have been processed, pretty much fully electronically, overall, kind of the delay in receipt of funds is shrinking because we don't have the mail float as much. We don't have nearly as much processing float, but also the delay in paying or disbursements, that's also shrunk as well. And so a lot more has become more instantaneous overall as more and more electronic payments are occurring. So the actual mechanism of the transaction is affecting that delay in receipt a whole lot less, I would argue. Now, that leads us then into kind of the idea of a target cash balance. And that is, well, we've talked about in prior videos, ideal levels of inventory and ideal levels of receivables and things like that. Well, the same kind of thing kind of plays into cash. There are reasons that we like having cash on hand. If you go into a recession, cash is handy to have in a recession. If some emergency arises in your business, a facility experiences some kind of damage in a storm or something, cash is handy to have. Some sudden opportunity presents itself. Cash is handy to have, right? There are all kinds of reasons why cash is handy, but it's also kind of unproductive and doesn't really generate a whole lot of return for me. So I kind of have that complicated relationship with cash where I kind of like it and kind of need it, but I don't necessarily want it either. So it's kind of this mixture. I prefer to have my money invested in other ways, right? So if you're thinking about all those kinds of reasons why we need cash in order to pay for various bills, cash to pay my wages, cash to pay taxes, cash to pay suppliers, all kinds of reasons we need to pay cash to have on hand when sudden opportunities arise. There are all kinds of reasons why we need to have cash. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to look at all those reasons, and after factoring them in, they aren't necessarily added on top of each other, but you're going to factor them in, all those different reasons for having cash, and out of that is going to arrive the target cash balance. And that's basically the ideal level of cash you think you need to have in order to run the business. And you're going to try to factor in all those reasons we need cash to arrive at here's how much we need to have overall. And if I have this amount, I pretty much should be able to keep running my business day to day without having any problems. Now, this could be a lot easier if your business is super predictable. Because if I am a super predictable business and I have money coming in very predictable intervals, money going out in very predictable intervals, it's going to be much easier to try to manage. This is the amount that I want to keep in the bank account or accounts at all times. If I'm a very seasonal business, this is going to be much more complicated and much harder because I'm going to have a lot more money flowing in, a lot more money going out at various points in time. And this can make it a lot more difficult to try to stay at a particular target level. And then this is really relatively similar to at the individual level, if you're working a job that pays a defined salary versus a job that is commission-based. If you have a job that's commission-based, how much money you have coming in every month could fluctuate quite a bit depending on what's gone on during that month. And as a result, if you were trying to have a specific amount in your bank account at all times, managing that would get a lot more complicated because you don't really know for sure what's going to be coming in. And your bills may fluctuate a little bit as well. And so if your bills are fluctuating and your income is fluctuating, it can be a lot harder to predict essentially and to manage to stay at that particular target cash balance. Businesses, it's the same basic idea. The more predictable their cash inflows or receipts and disbursements are, the easier it is to stay at a target cash balance. Now, since I talked about cash and having money on hand for some of these kind of reasons, it's kind of worth noting marketable securities. So what some businesses do is they may park some amount of their liquidity in marketable securities, and they're highly liquid securities that offer a somewhat higher return. And so they typically are held for very similar reasons as cash. It's not quite as liquid as cash because cash is already cash. So marketable securities might take a little bit to convert them to cash, but they're very highly liquid, and I get a little higher return. And this is sort of kind of a little bit of a middle ground here where we're kind of recognizing, all right, we got to have a certain amount of cash on hand. I don't like the fact that I'm not getting much return on it. So let's try to carve out some of this, maybe put over there marketable securities. I get a little bit of a higher return, almost as liquid as cash, but I get a little bit more return out of it, and that is a little bit more efficient. Or if I had cash that I was trying to set aside for an acquisition that I was imminently going to complete shortly, again, marketable securities, I might park it there, get some interest on it, a little bit more than I would have in just say a financial institution account. So that's held for the same kind of reasons as cash, almost as liquid as cash. It's going to be linked to things like that target cash balance, but held a little bit of a different way to generate a little bit more return. All right, hopefully this little discussion about receipts and disbursements and cash balances has been helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.